Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. At first glance, Draco Malfoy is a character that's hard to love. A pure-blood snob, heir to a Death Eater family, a cruel and arrogant boy who made Harry Potter's life miserable from day one. But if you look just a little deeper, even J.K. Rowling herself was surprised by the wave of affection fans feel toward Draco. Why did he become one of the most beloved characters in the saga, despite his obvious flaws? Is it his charm, the appeal of the bad boy? Or is there simply more to Draco than meets the eye? Today, I invite you to explore the most common misconceptions about Draco Malfoy. And perhaps you'll see for yourself why he deserves understanding, and maybe even a bit of love. Enjoy the video. Number 1. He's incredibly patient. Draco is often perceived as a hot-headed and self-important teenager, but if you take a closer look, his true character is far more complex. In The Half-Blood Prince, he shows remarkable patience and composure as he repeatedly attempts to fix the vanishing cabinet to let Death Eaters into Hogwarts, a task that takes him nearly the entire school year. He didn't abandon the plan after the first failure. On the contrary, he worked alone, risking exposure. That's not just teenage stubbornness. It's strategic thinking and self-control that neither his teachers nor Voldemort expected. Number 2. Draco was actually a good student. Being a proper wizard takes more than lineage. Draco was genuinely diligent in his studies. His family, especially his father, expected not just ideological loyalty but also academic excellence. And Draco worked hard to live up to those expectations. By 5th year, he had been made a prefect. And it wasn't just because of his last name. He had strong grades and discipline. In this, he stood out positively compared to many of his peers. Number 3, he might not even have the dark mark. Many people assume Draco was a Death Eater because of the dark mark on his arm, especially if they've only seen the films, but the books never directly confirmed the mark's presence. J.K. Rowling later explained that she deliberately left this question unanswered. Draco's involvement with Voldemort was forced, born out of fear and family pressure. And perhaps the absence of a mark is symbolic. His soul was not yet fully stained. Number 4, his family used to work with Muggles. Ironically, before the International Statute of Secrecy, the Malfoy family had close dealings with Muggles, particularly wealthy and powerful ones. They were interested in money and influence, not blood purity. Their refusal to sign the statute wasn't out of principle, but out of a desire to maintain those profitable connections. Only later did they begin crafting the image of untouchable pure-blood aristocrats. So for decades, the Malfoys relied on those they now openly scorn. Number 5. He had feelings for Pansy Parkinson. Crabbe and Goyle were more like bodyguards than friends, but Pansy Parkinson clearly had a soft spot for Draco. At first glance, he seemed cold toward her. Draco was not the type to show affection easily. Still, Pansy stayed close to him throughout all their school years. That couldn't have been a coincidence. Their feelings may not have been as fiery as Ron and Hermione's, but they were real. Draco rarely let anyone get close, but Pansy, it seems, was the exception. Number 6. Draco was actually a very capable wizard. A common myth says Draco was weak in magic. He did lose duels to Harry and never shone on the Quidditch field, but magic is more than just spells and wands. He mastered occlumency, a rare and complex skill to protect the mind. He kept Madame Rosmerta under the Imperious Curse, orchestrated the Vanishing Cabinet scheme, avoided teacher suspicion, and manipulated adults. That requires real magical competence and an expert sense of control. Draco wasn't an academic genius like Hermione, but his talent lay elsewhere, in survival magic, stealth, and tactics. That's powerful magic in its own right. Number 7. Draco was afraid of Voldemort. Draco wore the robes, he spoke the words, but he was never a true Death Eater, not in his heart. In Half-Blood Prince, Voldemort gives him an impossible task: to murder Albus Dumbledore. It wasn't a reward, it was punishment. A message to the Malfoy family: Prove your loyalty or be destroyed. Draco wasn't thrilled, he was terrified. He vanished from his friends, haunted the room of requirement, failed over and over to fix the vanishing cabinet. Every step deeper into the plan left him more broken. He seemed a shadow of his former self, the book says. The pride was gone. Only panic remained. On the astronomy tower, Draco finally stands face to face with Dumbledore, wand raised, hands trembling, eyes filled with tears. "You are not a killer, Draco," Dumbledore says gently. And he's right. Draco's lips quiver, his voice cracks. He's begging for a way out, not for blood. He never casts the spell, not even when he has the perfect chance, because he didn't believe in the cause. He believed in survival. Voldemort didn't offer him glory, he offered him terror. And that's what we see in that moment. Not ambition, but a boy, frozen by fear, crumbling under the weight of a nightmare. Number 8. He wasn't Harry's main enemy. Draco was never Harry's true enemy. He mocked him, challenged him, insulted his friends. But he didn't try to kill him. He didn't curse him in secret or set traps to destroy him. That role belonged to others. Professor Quirrell, who let Voldemort live on the back of his head, the basilisk, slithering through the pipes of Hogwarts, Peter Pettigrew, who betrayed Harry's parents, and Voldemort himself, the shadow behind it all. Compared to them, Draco was loud, annoying, but ultimately harmless. A rival, not a threat. Their fights were about pride, not power, about houses, not Horcruxes. When Draco snatched Neville's Remembrall or sneered at Hermione's blood status, it stung, but it wasn't life or death. Even their most famous confrontation, the duel that never happened in Chamber of Secrets, ended with Draco summoning a snake and Harry speaking Parseltongue. The moment wasn't about Draco's darkness. It was about Harry discovering his own. Draco wasn't there to destroy the hero. He was there to sharpen him, to force him to choose who he wanted to be. And in that way, he played his part. Not as a villain, but as a mirror. Number 9, he didn't fully share his family's beliefs. Draco was born into ideology. His father, Lucius Malfoy, lived and breathed blood purity. His mother followed the family line, but Draco, he hesitated, not all at once, not loudly, just enough to show he was beginning to question. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry is captured and brought to Malfoy Manor, his face swollen beyond recognition, Bellatrix screams for Draco to identify him. He stares, looks again. "I can't be sure," he says. But he is sure. He knows it's Harry, and still he refuses to say. That one moment speaks louder than all the curses he ever cast. He didn't want to damn another person, not anymore. He had seen what loyalty to Voldemort had cost his family. Their mansion, once cold and powerful, had become a prison. Draco wasn't brave like Harry. He didn't fight in the open, but he resisted in silence, through hesitation, through fear. His blood may have been pure, his name heavy with expectation, but in that flicker of doubt, in that refusal to speak, we see a boy pulling away from the legacy he never asked for. Number 10. He changed after the war. Draco Malfoy didn't stay the boy he once was. After the war, he didn't chase power. He didn't cling to old names or bloodlines. He stepped back, quietly. He married Astoria Greengrass, not for politics, but for peace. She, too, had no interest in the old ways. And when their son Scorpius was born, Draco broke the chain. No talk of blood purity, no tales of glory, just freedom. "We raised him to be kind," Draco says in The Cursed Child. That line alone is a revolution, a Malfoy raising a son with kindness at the center. He could have shaped Scorpius into another pure-blood heir. He didn't. When rumors swirled that Scorpius was Voldemort's child, Draco didn't rage or threaten. He stood beside his son. "I would sell my soul for another minute with Astoria," he confesses, "and I would trade it again to protect him." That isn't the voice of a boy who once mocked others for being different. It's the voice of a man who's known loss, fear, and the cost of hate. A man who's chosen gentleness instead of pride, Draco didn't just grow older, he grew up. He even made peace with Harry. In The Cursed Child they stand together, not as enemies, not as friends, but as fathers. There's a nod of understanding between them, a silent apology for everything that came before. When Harry asks if Scorpius is happy, Draco answers softly, "He's the most important thing in my world." That's the Draco no one expected. Not a villain, not a coward, just a man who learned, painfully, slowly, how to be good. Number 11, his bond with Snape, was deeper than it seemed. Draco trusted few people, and Severus Snape was one of them. On the surface, theirs looked like a typical Slytherin bond. Professor and favoured student, sharing house loyalty and sharp tongues. But underneath that surface was something rare, protection born from quiet understanding. When Lucius Malfoy fell out of favour with Voldemort, Draco was left exposed, no more shield, no more status. And Snape stepped in, not for power, not for glory, but because he saw the boy no one else did. Snape made the unbreakable vow with Narcissa Malfoy, a promise that could kill him just to keep Draco alive. Should it prove necessary? If it seems Draco will fail, will you carry out the deed? Narcissa whispered. I will, Snape said without blinking. It wasn't just duty, it was mercy. He watched Draco fall apart that year, watched him hide in shadows, watched his hands tremble. And he never exposed him. When Draco nearly collapsed after repairing the vanishing cabinet, it was Snape who found him. When Draco lay bleeding on the bathroom floor, it was Snape who healed him. Snape covered for him again and again. He lied to the staff, he lied to the Death Eaters, he lied to Voldemort. And through it all, Draco knew. He didn't say it out loud, he didn't have to. Their glances in the corridors said enough. In a world where Draco couldn't trust anyone, not even his own father, Snape stood still, silent, watching, protecting. And in that silence, Draco wasn't alone. Number 12, he suffered from loneliness. Draco Malfoy walked through Hogwarts with two shadows at his side, Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle. They were always there, hulking behind him like loyal dogs, but they weren't friends. They didn't talk to him about fear, or love, or pain. They nodded, they obeyed, they laughed when he needed an audience. That was their role. When Draco hurt, he didn't turn to them, because he couldn't. He had no one. He wore arrogance like a mask. He laughed louder than he meant to. He insulted more cruelly than he wanted. You'll soon find out that some wizarding families are better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. Philosopher's Stone, Chapter 5. But behind those words was a boy desperate to be seen. That first day, on the Hogwarts Express, Draco offered Harry his hand. Not out of condescension, but out of hope. Harry refused, and Draco was left standing in silence, humiliated. It was a rejection he never forgot. As years passed, his isolation deepened. When things grew dark, when the war crept closer, Draco didn't confide in anyone. In Half-Blood Prince, he slipped away from his so-called friends, avoided conversations, hid in the room of requirement alone. There, away from prying eyes, he worked endlessly on the vanishing cabinet. Sometimes he looks terrible, doesn't he? Said Pansy Parkinson. He's pale as anything, and he's got dark circles under his eyes. Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 21. They noticed, but no one helped. No one really asked. He was the Prince of Slytherin, but he ate lunch surrounded by silence. He was heir to one of the oldest wizarding families, but he was terrified in his own home. Even his parents, Narcissa and Lucius, loved him with the kind of love that felt like pressure. He was always performing, never resting. And that loneliness grew heavier every day. That's why Draco Malfoy still lingers in the minds of fans, not as the villain, but as the boy who looked like he had everything, yet never had what he truly needed, someone who understood him, Number 13, Draco wasn't just a petty tattletale. Draco Malfoy quickly earned a reputation as the classic tattletale. By the time he strutted into his first year at Hogwarts, he was already running to Professor Snape about everything Harry, Ron, or Hermione did. Whether it was the trio sneaking out at night or speaking out in class, Draco always had something to report. It was easy to label him a coward, someone who hid behind adults instead of facing his peers. But that wasn't the full story. Draco grew up in a world where informing on others was seen as smart, even admirable. Lucius Malfoy didn't raise his son to be silent. In the Malfoy household, loyalty to your own meant exposing threats, especially blood traitors and muggleborns. To Draco, snitching wasn't weakness. It was survival. It was how power worked. So when he reported Harry's illegal broomstick in the Sorcerer's Stone, or pointed out Hagrid's mistakes in the Chamber of Secrets, he believed he was doing what a proper Slytherin should. But something changed by 6th year. Draco stopped telling. He stopped running to Snape or anyone else. When he was tasked with the most impossible mission of his life, assassinating Dumbledore, he told no one, not even his closest housemates knew. He spent the year alone, repairing the vanishing cabinet in secret. No complaints, no tattling, just silent desperation. "You don't understand," he told Harry on the Hogwarts Express. "I have to do this. He'll kill me otherwise." The boy, who once whined to teachers, now kept deadly secrets from them. This shift was quiet, but powerful. No longer the loud-mouthed kid looking for approval, Draco carried a burden that even adults would have crumbled under. He stopped using the system and tried to outgrow it. He didn't succeed, not fully. But the boy who once ran to Snape over spilled potion had become someone who suffered in silence. And that made all the difference. Number 14, he didn't think of himself as a villain. Of all the students who walked the ancient corridors of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, few were as misunderstood as Draco Malfoy. To many, he was nothing more than a spoiled aristocrat, a sneering symbol of privilege and prejudice. But buried beneath his smirks and insults was a deeper, more intricate truth. Draco never thought of himself as a villain. He didn't wake up in the morning plotting evil for evil's sake. He believed, with utter conviction, that he was on the right side of history, and that belief, more than anything else, makes his story tragically compelling. Draco's identity was forged long before his arrival at Hogwarts. Raised in the grand halls of Malfoy Manor under the stern gaze of Lucius Malfoy and the cautious affection of Narcissa, he was taught a very specific view of the world. Blood mattered, power mattered, discipline, family honor, and loyalty to tradition. These were the pillars of his upbringing. The wizarding world, as he had been taught, was divided between those who preserved its purity and those who polluted it. This worldview wasn't optional for him. It was the air he breathed. He didn't consider it cruel. He considered it correct. When Draco met Harry Potter for the first time at Madame Malkin's robe shop in Diagon Alley, he wasn't trying to be antagonistic. He was trying to connect, to offer a hand to someone he assumed would share his values. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are better than others, Potter," he said. "You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort." These words, arrogant and dismissive to the reader, were to Draco an honest warning, almost an act of goodwill. He saw Harry as someone who might be like him, a pureblood raised with honor, and was genuinely confused when Harry rejected his hand in favor of Ron Weasley, a boy Draco saw as beneath him. That moment stung Draco more than he ever let on. It was a rejection not just of friendship, but of identity. From that day on, Draco viewed Harry not just as an opponent, but as a defector from the ideals that he had always been told were self-evident. To Draco, Harry wasn't the hero. He was the ungrateful outsider who didn't understand his place. The chosen one who somehow chose the wrong people. Gryffindor wasn't a house of bravery. It was a house of foolishness and recklessness. Slytherin was the only house that made sense, the one that produced real leaders. In Draco's eyes, he was the one playing the role of the misunderstood patriot, not the villain in someone else's narrative. Throughout his school years, Draco maintained this belief. He saw his actions as justified. When he called Hermione a mudblood, it was not in his mind an act of malice. It was the repetition of a worldview handed to him by generations of his family. He didn't consider her inferior out of personal hatred. He had simply been taught that bloodline determined potential, just as a purebred hippogriff was more reliable than a half-breed. Of course, this belief was wrong, but it wasn't one Draco had invented himself. He was a product of legacy, not of evil. This is what makes Draco's arc so haunting. He wasn't a young Voldemort. He wasn't born twisted or filled with megalomaniacal desires. He was a boy who couldn't see beyond the frame his parents and society had placed around him. He clung to his beliefs, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear of being wrong, of being cast out, of being seen as weak. When Umbridge came to power, Draco revelled in her authority, not because he believed in her sadism, but because she validated his belief that Slytherins were right all along. For once, the system was tilted in his favour. It felt like justice. But it wasn't justice. And Draco began to see that when the consequences of his ideology started crashing down around him. In his 6th year, when Voldemort entrusted him with the impossible task of murdering Albus Dumbledore, Draco's illusion cracked. This wasn't a game anymore. It wasn't about house points or Quidditch matches. It was about murder, real, irreversible, blood-on-your-hands murder. And for the first time, Draco realized what it meant to be on the wrong side of history. Inside the Room of Requirement, when Draco disarmed Dumbledore, the world stood still. He had done what even the Dark Lord hadn't accomplished. He had bested the greatest wizard of the age. And yet he couldn't bring himself to finish the job. He lowered his wand. He hesitated. Because in that moment he saw himself not as a warrior, not as a loyal servant, but as a frightened boy who didn't want to kill. "Draco, Draco, you are not a killer," Dumbledore said. And he was right. That moment mattered because it shattered the idea Draco had of himself. He wasn't strong enough, or maybe, just maybe, strength looked different than he'd been taught. When Snape cast the killing curse instead, taking the burden from Draco, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a betrayal of everything Draco thought he stood for. And as the war escalated and Malfoy Manor became a prison and a courtroom for Voldemort's regime, Draco shrank more and more into himself. He didn't speak up when the Carrows tortured students. He didn't rise to power in the New Order. He became quiet, watchful, pale. There was no pride in what he had helped bring about. Only guilt, only fear. And yet he never made a dramatic break. He never stood up in the Great Hall and denounced Voldemort. His disillusionment was silent, subtle, human. He stayed because he was afraid, for his family, for himself, because stepping out of the circle meant becoming a target, because in truth Draco never had the courage of a Gryffindor. He had something else, the slow, aching process of awakening. And sometimes that's harder. Number 15, he carried emotional scars. It was easy to hate Draco Malfoy, that was the point. He made it easy, with his drawling voice, his perfect blonde hair, his disdainful sneers and cutting remarks. He made sure no one ever saw past the polished surface. But there was something else, something darker, hiding beneath the layers of silk robes and inherited arrogance, something that no one at Hogwarts ever truly saw until it was almost too late. The truth was that Draco was not just a schoolyard bully or a spoilt prince of Slytherin. He was a boy drowning in fear, choked by the expectations of a crumbling legacy. The Draco that first appeared on the Hogwarts Express was a projection, a carefully curated echo of Lucius Malfoy's ambition. He had learned young that his last name came with weight. Not just power, but obligation. From the earliest age, he saw how people bowed before his father, how his mother never truly exhaled, how the family name could open doors, but also seal fates. And then, in a single night, that legacy faltered. The Dark Lord fell. Lucius avoided Azkaban only through bribery and political maneuvering. The whispers began. Malfoy Manor, once a symbol of untouchable power, became a house of unease. Draco was still a child when he saw fear take root in his home. He watched his father pace the halls with restless anger, saw his mother lower her voice when speaking of old allies who had disappeared. At first, it confused him. Why were they no longer invited to certain parties? Why did his father argue with ministry officials late into the night? He wasn't old enough to understand the war, but he was old enough to understand when a room turned cold with tension. He learned to read silences. He learned that trust was a dangerous luxury. By the time Draco reached Hogwarts, he had already built his first emotional armor. He knew which words cut deepest, which tones carried superiority. He mimicked his father's disdainful poise and wore it like a second skin. But even then, the cracks were already there, invisible, but growing. His need for control, for dominance, for validation, it was not born out of confidence, but desperation. Every insult he hurled at Hermione, every time he mocked Ron's poverty or tried to humiliate Harry, it was a ritual, a plea to prove to himself that he still mattered, that the Malfoy name still meant something. The truth is, Draco's cruelty was never spontaneous. It was studied, practiced. He needed people to fear him because fear was the only power he understood. Love, loyalty, those were things he never saw practiced honestly in his world. Even his friendships with Crabbe and Goyle were built on hierarchy, not affection. They followed him because he allowed them to, because they were useful. In private, Draco was often alone. He would sit in the Slytherin common room, staring into the green-tinged fire, lips tight, thoughts circling like vultures. By his 5th year, everything began to unravel. Lucius had returned to the service of the Dark Lord. The name Malfoy was once again associated with power, but now it came with dread, not respect. And Draco knew. He knew what it meant when his father disappeared for days, when his mother cried behind closed doors. He knew that Voldemort had returned, and that this time failure would mean more than shame. It would mean death, and he, still a child, was to be part of it. When Voldemort assigned Draco the task of killing Albus Dumbledore, it wasn't an opportunity. It was a death sentence, a punishment directed at Lucius for his failure at the Department of Mysteries. Draco understood that. His father had failed to secure the prophecy. The family had fallen from grace once again. But Voldemort didn't discard the Malfoys. He did something worse. He gave them a second chance, the kind of chance that was laced with knives. From the beginning of the 6th book, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Draco is different. Gone is the smug boy who strutted through the halls. In his place is someone thinner, paler, quieter, someone who spends long hours alone in the room of requirement, hunched over a vanishing cabinet, his hands trembling. The transformation is subtle, but it's there. Even Harry notices. He looked paler than ever, and somehow, simultaneously, more shadowed and gaunt. The mask is cracking. Draco's emotional collapse was not dramatic. It was slow. He stopped taunting in the corridors. He snapped at Crabbe and Goyle. He refused to eat in the Great Hall. And in the rare moments when someone tried to reach him, even Snape, he recoiled like a wounded animal. He couldn't tell anyone the truth. He couldn't ask for help. He had no one, and worse, he had blood on his hands. In his efforts to fix the vanishing cabinet, 2 students had been nearly killed, Katie Bell, Ron Weasley. He hadn't meant for it to happen, but it had. He was in too deep. And then came the tower. That single moment, standing face to face with Dumbledore, wand shaking, heart pounding, was the apex of Draco's unraveling. He was sobbing, terrified, and most tragically unsure. He couldn't do it. He had been prepared for this moment for months. He had practiced, rehearsed, but he couldn't kill. He wasn't like his father. He wasn't like Voldemort. Deep down, beneath all the layers of arrogance, Draco had a conscience. "Draco, Draco, you are not a killer." Dumbledore's words pierced the silence like a bell tolling. And Draco, broken, pale, tears on his face, didn't answer. He didn't have to, because Dumbledore was right. And Draco knew it. That moment revealed everything that had been hidden. The frightened child, the boy who had been used. The soul twisting under the weight of a task too dark for his age. Number 16. He could have been Harry's ally. In that moment aboard the Hogwarts Express, when Draco Malfoy extended his hand to Harry Potter, the entire course of wizarding history trembled on the edge of a possibility. It wasn't just a childish gesture, it was the last fork in the road before darkness divided them. Malfoy was not yet the enemy. He was a boy, raised in a mansion full of shadows, reaching out with the only kind of politeness he had ever been taught. "You'll soon find out that some wizarding families are better than others, Potter," he said, offering both a warning and an invitation. Had Harry, unfamiliar with wizarding customs, seen through the haughtiness to the loneliness behind it, he might have taken that hand. And with that handshake, he might have changed everything. Draco Malfoy grew up under Lucius Malfoy's watchful eye, a man who valued power, bloodlines, and loyalty to dark traditions. But Draco, still 11, hadn't become that man yet. He was curious about Harry, intrigued even. He had heard the stories, the whispers in the manor about the boy who lived. Meeting Harry must have been like meeting a myth. When Harry rebuffed him and chose Ron Weasley, Draco's natural pride twisted into bitterness. But imagine an alternate timeline where Harry shook Draco's hand, laughed at his snide remarks, and accepted him not as an enemy, but as a peer. Suddenly, the scion of the Malfoys is not isolated in Slytherin, plotting with Crabbe and Goyle, but growing into a different boy, one tempered by Harry's influence. In their first year, the animosity solidified too quickly, yet even then cracks showed. When Neville Longbottom fell off his broom during their flying lesson, Draco's reaction was not just cruelty, it was a show for the others. He stole the Remembrall not to hurt Harry, but to dominate the social dynamic. When Harry chased him on the broomstick, Draco wasn't expecting admiration. He found a rival who matched him. In another universe, he might have laughed, handed back the Remembrall, and congratulated Harry. What would have happened if their rivalry was playful instead of venomous? The seeds of companionship were there, buried under layers of pride. The moment in their second year, when Dobby tried to protect Harry from returning to Hogwarts, is telling. Draco later boasted to his friends about how his family owned the elf, showing off his status. But perhaps in a different world, Draco might have noticed the way Harry treated Dobby, not as a servant, but as a being worthy of respect. And perhaps that version of Draco, still in awe of Harry's fame and kindness, would begin to question the world his father built. When Ron vomited slugs after defending Hermione against Draco's mudblood slur, it was easy to cast Draco as the villain. But children often mirror the language of their homes. That same Draco, shaped by a bond with Harry, might have begun to unlearn his family's poison. Third year brought Dementors, Time Turners, and the ever-present weight of fear. During the Buckbeak incident, Draco's theatrics were rooted in his need for control. He exaggerated his injury not simply out of cruelty, but out of a craving for attention. He was a child begging to be seen. If Harry had been close to him, had given him that attention and recognition as a friend, would Draco still have felt the need to manipulate? Perhaps not. And when the truth about Sirius Black unraveled, Draco mocked Harry, but it's plausible that a more empathetic Draco would have reacted differently. A Draco who had once lost his own sense of safety, confiding in a friend like Harry, might have understood. Fourth year changed everything. The Triwizard Tournament threw Harry into the centre of suspicion. Slytherin closed ranks against him, and Draco, ever eager for his father's approval, took up the banner of mockery. Potter Stinks badges became symbols of division. But even then, behind the jeers was a flicker of resentment, not hatred, envy. Harry's independence, his courage, his defiance of authority. These were traits Draco admired but could never admit to. Had their friendship grown over the years, Draco might have defended Harry in the common room rather than deriding him. Imagine Draco, elegant and cunning, working behind the scenes to help Harry navigate the tournament's perils, not out of loyalty to Dumbledore, but out of loyalty to his friend. The fifth year was perhaps the true turning point. When Dolores Umbridge rose to power at Hogwarts, Draco became her eager assistant, using his prefect status and inquisitorial squad authority to punish dissenters. But this was also the year Draco began to realize the cost of choosing the wrong side. He saw the suffering, the divisions, the quiet terror Umbridge instilled. A Draco who had once walked alongside Harry might have used his influence differently, perhaps even helped Dumbledore's army from within. He was resourceful enough, clever enough. A double life wouldn't have been beyond him. By sixth year, Draco was no longer a boy. The task Voldemort gave him, to kill Albus Dumbledore, was a death sentence. We see Draco unravel, terrified, crumbling under the weight of expectation. "I haven't got any options," he cries in the bathroom before the duel with Harry. There is no cruelty in his eyes, only despair. In that moment, Harry uses Sectum Sempra and blood stains the tiles. But what if instead Draco had confided in Harry? What if that year, instead of avoiding him, Harry had seen through the act and offered help? There was no loyalty to Voldemort in Draco's soul, only fear. Number 17, he deserves sympathy. Draco Malfoy stands alone in the darkened corridor of the Room of Requirement, staring at the vanishing cabinet that might save his family. His hands tremble, though he hides them in his robes. He is 16 years old, burdened with a mission he neither chose nor fully understands, and the future of his parents depends on his success. The boy who once sneered in school corridors now finds himself trapped between a tyrant's command and a quiet, unspoken desire to be free of it all. His world has changed since the summer. No more childish taunts or Quidditch matches, just a secret task, a ticking clock, and a weight pressing on his chest so heavy it threatens to crush him. It is easy to hate Draco when we see him through Harry's eyes. From the moment he refuses Harry's handshake in Madame Malkin's robe shop, Draco is positioned as the antagonist, arrogant, proud, mean-spirited. He mocks Ron's poverty, insults Hermione's blood status, and walks the castle like it belongs to him. But beyond this facade lies a child who has been taught, not born, into cruelty. Raised in a manor draped in ancestral pride, Draco learned from his earliest years that bloodline determined worth and loyalty to the Dark Lord was not optional. Lucius Malfoy, cold and commanding, set the standard. Narcissa, elegant and devoted, taught obedience through silence. Draco did not become this way alone. When Harry sees Draco crying in the bathroom during Half-Blood Prince, the scene is brief, almost confusing. For the first time, the Golden Trio's enemy is revealed not as a villain, but a boy breaking under pressure. Draco Malfoy was standing there with his back to Harry. He appeared to be talking to the tap. He was crying, Rowling writes. Crying, not plotting, not sneering. This moment, fleeting and raw, offers a window into Draco's true condition, terrified, ashamed, and drowning. He had spent months pretending to be confident, refusing help from Snape, isolating himself from his peers, but alone he unravels. That bathroom scene becomes even more pivotal when we remember what Draco had been tasked with. He was to kill Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, a man who had once shown leniency to Draco's own father. And why? Because Voldemort, cruel and calculating, wanted to punish Lucius for his failures at the Ministry. Draco's assignment was never about trust. It was about making the Malfoys pay in the most excruciating way possible, forcing their only son to commit murder or die trying. In that context, every cruel smirk and threatening glance Draco throws becomes something else, armor for a boy who knows he may not survive the year. Snape's unbreakable vow to protect Draco is not just a narrative twist, but an indictment of the adult world's failure to protect children from their wars. Severus, himself a man consumed by regrets, sees what others overlook. Draco's mission is not bravery, but desperation. Even Bellatrix Lestrange, who scoffs at Draco's abilities, sees him as expendable. Yet no one in the Order offers him a lifeline. No one considers that perhaps the boy could be saved. He becomes the invisible victim of a war where children are conscripted without their consent. Draco's actions in the 6th book reflect his torment. He tries to fix the Vanishing Cabinet, hoping it will allow Death Eaters to enter Hogwarts so that he won't have to kill Dumbledore himself. He attempts to curse Katie Bell and poison Ron, not to eliminate them personally, but to make a point, to send a message, to prove to the Dark Lord that he is willing to act. But none of these efforts succeed. Instead, they endanger innocent lives and further unravel Draco's self-image. He is not a killer. He is not like Bellatrix, and he knows it. In the Astronomy Tower, when he finally confronts Dumbledore, the truth becomes unbearable. He lowers his wand. He hesitates. "Draco, Draco, you are not a killer," Dumbledore says, his voice soft and sure. And Draco knows it's true. He has been carrying a wand and a task for months, but when the moment comes he cannot do it. His hands shake, his mouth wavers, and that moment of hesitation defines him more than all his previous cruelty. He is not brave enough to defy Voldemort openly, but he is human enough to resist murder. That is his redemption, though it comes quietly, unnoticed by most. Even after Voldemort's rise, Draco does not become a Death Eater in the way others do. He bears the mark, yes, but his heart is never in it. During the Battle of Hogwarts, he is not seen fighting bravely for the Dark Lord. He is seen trying to survive. In the Room of Requirement, he chases Harry, Crabbe, and Goyle, but it is clear he is not seeking to kill anyone. When Crabbe conjures Fiendfire, Draco nearly dies, and Harry saves him twice. The boy he had mocked, hated, and challenged again and again chooses to save him. That rescue matters, not just because Harry is noble, but because Draco does not fight it. He does not reject the hand extended to him. In that fiery chaos, he accepts salvation from the very person he once loathed. And afterwards, though he never becomes Harry's friend, he stops being his enemy. In the epilogue, they nod politely. Nothing more is needed. That brief acknowledgement signals years of growth. They are not the same boys they were at 11. They are men now, shaped by loss, grief, and choices. Draco's transformation is not loud. He does not join the Order. He does not deliver rousing speeches or duel Voldemort. His redemption arc is silent, private. He marries Astoria Greengrass, a woman who, according to Rowling's post-canon material, shares none of the pure blood mania of his parents. Together, they choose to raise their son Scorpius differently. Draco, once obsessed with lineage, now focuses on love and protection. He becomes a father who shields his child from the very ideology that nearly destroyed him. In The Cursed Child, his character deepens. We see a Draco who has suffered. He has lost his wife, and he clings fiercely to his son. "I have scars too," he tells Harry, not of battle, but of the deep loneliness he endured. He admits he had no true friends at Hogwarts, only followers. He reveals his envy of the bond Harry shared with Ron and Hermione. This vulnerability, long hidden, shows that Draco's coldness was not pride, but defense. He was isolated, even among his peers, and he knew it. The story of Draco Malfoy is not one of heroism, but of survival. He is a boy who made bad choices for understandable reasons and a man who tried to live differently. He reminds us that people are not static. They change, they grow, they regret. In Draco, Rowling crafted one of her most subtle and complex characters, not because he is lovable, but because he is painfully real. There is also the question of shame, a silent companion throughout Draco's adolescence. He is ashamed of his failures, ashamed of his fear, ashamed of the cowardice he cannot admit even to himself. This shame manifests in cruelty, in attempts to reassert control in a world where he has none. He bullies because it is the only power he understands. But behind the smirk is a boy screaming for direction. When Lucius is imprisoned after the fiasco at the Ministry, the Malfoys fall from grace. No longer the confident patriarch, Lucius is broken, desperate, and scorned. The burden shifts to Draco. Suddenly he is the family's last hope. Narcissa, loving but helpless, can only watch. This pressure twists Draco further. He is not just performing for Voldemort, he is trying to restore his father's name, to reclaim their place in a world he once believed unshakable. That is why he walks the halls of Hogwarts like a ghost, avoiding even his closest associates. Draco's relationship with his parents is another layer often overlooked. He loves them, but their expectations suffocate him. Narcissa's decision to lie to Voldemort about Harry's death is driven by that love, a mother's instinct to protect her son, but it also shows how trapped the Malfoys have become. They are no longer believers in Voldemort's cause. They are survivors clinging to one another in the hope of getting through the war alive. In that final moment, family outweighs ideology, and Draco witnesses it all. In truth, Draco was never meant to be a monster. His worst traits were echoes of what he had been told to value: blood purity, power, pride. But under pressure, those beliefs crumbled. He saw what Voldemort truly was. He saw death. He saw betrayal. And it broke him, not into pieces, but into someone different. A man who looked back on his childhood with regret and looked forward to raising a son with more compassion. Draco's humanity lies in his contradictions. He is both cruel and kind, arrogant and fragile. He is someone who did not become a hero, but who did not let himself become evil either. He stayed in the grey, and that is what makes him fascinating. Characters like Harry and Hermione shine brightly, but Draco flickers, uncertain, struggling, but still there, still trying, still learning. There is a final irony to Draco's story. The boy who once boasted about his family's prestige ended up being remembered not for greatness, but for restraint. He did not fulfill Voldemort's wishes. He did not embrace his father's path. He simply endured. And that endurance, quiet and lonely, may be the most human quality of all. Number 18, he wasn't a coward. Draco Malfoy has long been dismissed as a coward. His first moments at Hogwarts support the accusation well enough. In the Forbidden Forest during his first year, he trembles beside Fang, terrified by the shadows and strange noises. He mocks Hagrid's creatures only to hide his anxiety. The image of a pampered, arrogant boy crumbling under pressure becomes canon in the minds of many readers. Yet this perception, like many things in the wizarding world, deserves to be re-examined under a different light. Because when stripped of the assumptions, Draco is not a coward. He is a young boy, burdened with expectations, drowning in fear, and yet, when the time comes, standing still while the world around him collapses. There is a common misconception that fear itself equates to cowardice. In Draco's case, fear is often his companion, but so is action. When he walks into the forest that night in the first book, it's easy to forget he is just 11 years old, raised in luxury, taught to scorn and command, he is now forced to wander the shadows with only a dog and the looming possibility of werewolves or worse. He panics, yes, but he doesn't run back to the castle. He completes the task even if his voice trembles, and this pattern repeats. He is never fearless, but he is rarely absent. His presence during moments of tension is almost always guaranteed. By the time the 6th book opens, the stakes for Draco have evolved into something monstrous. He is no longer just the school bully taunting Muggleborns and seeking favour from Professor Snape. He is now a boy conscripted into the war, not because he volunteered, but because Voldemort demanded a price for Lucius Malfoy's failures. The mission assigned to Draco is not a prank, it's an assassination. The Dark Lord, cunning as always, has no real belief that Draco will succeed. His assignment is a death sentence in disguise, a way to punish the Malfoy family further, to use Draco as a pawn whose failure will end in his own death and, likely, the death of his parents as well. Faced with this impossible burden, Draco does not crumble entirely. He does not go into hiding. He does not confess to the professors or beg Dumbledore for help. He steps into the role assigned to him, dark and bitter as it is. He spends months researching ways to let Death Eaters into the castle. He tries spells far beyond his level. He fixes the vanishing cabinet in the room of requirement. And all of this is done in silence, without aid, without glory. No applause waits for Draco at the end of his quest. Only a wand, a tower, and the blood-stained command of a monster who wants to see Dumbledore fall. The boy who was mocked for whining about hippogriffs is now orchestrating the infiltration of Hogwarts, and succeeding. That in itself is a terrifying display of maturity and discipline. He avoids suspicion. He hides the cabinet's repair, outwitting even the brilliant Hermione Granger. But the weight of his mission begins to show. His face becomes thinner, his shoulders slump. He collapses in a bathroom, unable to endure the pressure, and when Harry confronts him, Draco casts a curse that nearly kills. It's easy to call that cowardice, using dark magic in a panic. But the spell he uses, Sectum Sempra, is unknown to him. He is fighting for his life in a moment of desperation. After the duel, bleeding and gasping on the floor, Draco becomes a tragic figure rather than a villain. He is no longer a boy mocking others for fun. He is a son terrified of failure, trapped in a situation no child should endure. And yet the most powerful proof of Draco's courage emerges atop the astronomy tower. There, in the cold wind and moonlight, Draco comes face to face with Dumbledore, wand raised, hand trembling. The entire school is silent below, unaware of the storm above. Dumbledore, unarmed, speaks gently to him. He offers help, a way out. But Draco cannot respond. The fear of what will happen to his parents if he fails outweighs the promise of protection. Draco's voice breaks and his tears fall freely. "I have to do this," he says. But he doesn't. The wand remains raised. The words never leave his mouth. He is visibly shaking, sobbing, but he doesn't flee. He doesn't throw his wand away. He doesn't lower it either. He stands, locked in place, refusing to kill, even though the consequences of mercy could be fatal. Cowardice would have meant running. Cowardice would have meant shooting the curse and ending it quickly. But Draco, standing on the edge of that tower, becomes a symbol of quiet bravery. Not defiance with banners and flames, but something deeper. The moral courage to resist evil, even when resistance means doom. Snape arrives. The unbreakable vow forces his hand. Draco watches as Dumbledore dies, not at his hands, but because of the web of obligations spun around them all. Still, Draco's decision lingers. He made a choice, and that choice was not to kill. In the following year, Draco's allegiance remains unclear. He has become a Death Eater in name, but his actions are laced with hesitation. During the skirmish at Malfoy Manor, when Harry is captured and brought before Bellatrix, it is Draco who is asked to confirm the prisoner's identity. He hesitates. "I can't be sure," he says, even though he must know. In that moment, he lies, not to protect himself, but to stall, to delay, to create even a sliver of doubt that might save Harry's life. Draco Malfoy, once proud of his pure blood status, now stands in his family home as a reluctant gatekeeper of death. He doesn't raise his wand to defend Harry outright, but he also doesn't confirm his identity. His silence becomes its own kind of resistance. He is no longer the boy who used insults to feel powerful. He is someone who recognizes that real power lies in choices made in fear, not in the absence of it. Even in the Battle of Hogwarts, Draco's behavior is nuanced. He is seen trying to reach Harry in the Room of Requirement, accompanied by Crabbe and Goyle. What follows is chaos, fire, destruction, death. Crabbe casts fiend fire, a curse far too advanced, and the flames consume the room. Draco narrowly escapes death, and it is Harry who saves him again and again. But that doesn't mean Draco was there to kill. There is no evidence he cast a single offensive spell. He is there for something, perhaps redemption, perhaps uncertainty. But he is present. And presence in war matters. The epilogue shows a different Draco, pale, silent, distant. He watches Harry and his friends from afar, not with hatred, but with something that might be regret. He has grown up. The war has left scars not visible to the eye. He is no longer a threat, no longer a rival, just another father seeing off his child into a world he hopes is better than the one he inherited. There is a moment in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince when Dumbledore says, "Draco is not a killer." This is not an observation, it's a declaration, a line drawn between what Draco could be and what he is. Despite Voldemort's pressure, despite fear, despite opportunity, Draco never crosses the line. He walks along its edge. Yes, he is tempted, he is trained, but when the moment comes, he steps back. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is persistence in the face of it, and in that sense, Draco Malfoy exhibits courage that often goes unnoticed. He's not like Harry, bold and defiant. He's not like Neville, growing into bravery. Draco's courage is quieter, shadowed by shame, shaped by fear, but real. And it matters. The boy who mocked Muggleborns ends up begging for safety, not just for himself, but for his mother. Narcissa Malfoy, too, shows this strange brand of Malfoy courage when she lies to Voldemort at the very end, choosing her son over the Dark Lord. The Malfoy family is many things, proud, elitist, politically ruthless, but they are not cowards. When the war turns, they do not fight for Voldemort. They flee, not to escape judgment, but because they know they have already lost too much. Draco's story, therefore, is one of internal conflict. He never becomes a hero in the classic sense. He doesn't join Dumbledore's army or fight alongside the Order, but he also never becomes a villain in the full sense. He stands always on the edge of darkness, choosing, however faintly, to turn away from it. The wizarding world has little space for nuance. Heroes are brave, villains are cowards. But Draco's life complicates that narrative. He is what happens when a child is forced to wear a mask he doesn't want, to walk a path he didn't choose, and to live with choices that leave lasting marks. And through it all, he survives. He endures. He refuses to kill. That is not the mark of a coward. That is the quiet strength of someone who learns, too late perhaps, the true cost of pride. Draco Malfoy did not roar like Gryffindor, but his silence on that tower was louder than any shout. Number 19, he respected Hermione deep down. In their third year at Hogwarts, during a particularly tense potions lesson, Snape hovered over Hermione's cauldron with his usual disdain. But Draco Malfoy, seated just 2 rows behind, wasn't sneering at her this time. He was silent, watching. Hermione had brewed a perfect shrinking solution, textbook, perfect, bright green, bubbling gently. Snape grudgingly awarded 10 points to Gryffindor. Harry and Ron were ecstatic, but Malfoy didn't even react. He saw what the others didn't. She didn't just follow instructions, she understood them. An understanding to someone raised in the pure-blood supremacist ideology was supposed to be tied to lineage, to blood. Hermione, a Muggle-born, shattered that notion. Malfoy didn't hate her. He feared what she meant. In public, he mocked her endlessly. "You'll pay for that one, you filthy little mudblood," he hissed in Chamber of Secrets after she rightfully corrected his spellwork during a dueling club lesson. The entire hall recoiled, and the term itself shocked even Snape. But the hatred wasn't aimed at her as a person. It was defensive, even desperate. She represented everything Lucius Malfoy warned him about: clever, relentless, and unashamed of her non-magical origins. She dismantled piece by piece the pillars of superiority on which his family's pride was built. Hermione's brilliance wasn't the only threat. She was fearless. In Prisoner of Azkaban, she slapped him for mocking Hagrid. He could have hexed her, he could have retaliated, but he didn't. For all his bravado, Malfoy walked away humiliated and silent. That moment, often replayed for its sheer audacity, revealed something much deeper. Her courage shocked him, not because a girl hit him, but because it was her, a Muggle-born, taking a stand against the boy raised to believe himself superior. During their 5th year, the formation of Dumbledore's army further drove the wedge between Malfoy's indoctrination and reality. He watched from the Inquisitorial Squad's vantage point as Hermione organized resistance, planned lessons, and taught spells far more effectively than many professors. She didn't do it for power or praise, she did it for justice. Malfoy couldn't understand that. In his world, actions always came with ulterior motives. But Hermione acted out of principle, and that unsettled him. When Umbridge assigned them both to monitor the corridors, Malfoy often ended up shadowing Hermione's path from afar. Not in pursuit, but out of something like fascination. She was relentless, always with a purpose. She read even while walking. She corrected first years gently but firmly. He never told anyone, but one evening, hidden in the shadows, he overheard her helping a crying second-year Ravenclaw who couldn't cast a levitation charm. She coached the girl through it with patience no teacher had ever shown Malfoy. That night, he didn't sleep well. In Half-Blood Prince, the rift between the person Malfoy was supposed to be and the boy he actually was became clearer. Assigned a task that terrified him, Draco withdrew into himself. He stopped mocking others. He barely spoke. Even his jabs at Hermione lost their venom. "You think you're so clever," he muttered once in the hallway. But it was half-hearted, empty. She didn't answer. She looked at him, really looked, and he turned away. Something in him had changed. He wasn't fighting her anymore. He was fighting himself. Hermione, for her part, never softened toward Malfoy. She couldn't. He was cruel, and she'd never excuse his slurs or cowardice. But the reader sees what she can't, that the fury he unleashed on her was rooted in awe. She wasn't just better at magic. She embodied a different world, one where status wasn't inherited, where intellect and willpower determined your worth. She proved every day that the Malfoy worldview was obsolete. And he knew it. In the Room of Requirement, during the Battle of Hogwarts, Malfoy didn't target Hermione. He sought Harry as always, but when Hermione crossed his path, he hesitated. There was no time for insults, no superiority left to flaunt. He was running, dodging fire, and she was saving lives. She blasted a path through collapsing rubble while Ron dragged a wounded student. Malfoy watched them go, panting, eyes wide. That look wasn't fear, it was recognition. After the war, he said nothing to her. She said nothing to him. But when he testified before the Wizengamot about the Death Eaters, he mentioned, unprompted, that Hermione Granger, was one of the best of us. The court gasped. Rita Skeeter turned it into a headline, but it was true. That one sentence was a confession, an acknowledgement that had taken 7 years and a war to surface. He had seen her save Goyle, pulling the boy to safety during the cursed fire in the Room of Requirement. Draco had frozen, paralyzed by indecision. She hadn't. She'd screamed at him to move, then dove for Goyle herself. Her hand burned, her robe singed, but she didn't stop. Malfoy hadn't said thank you. He couldn't. The shame was too raw, but that moment lodged itself in his memory. Years later, at platform 9 3/4, Hermione saw him again. Their children didn't speak, but she noticed how Scorpius stood behind Malfoy's leg, shy and uncertain. When Rose waved, Scorpius smiled tentatively. Malfoy didn't pull him back. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, at Hermione. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't contempt. It was understanding. Draco's reverence for Hermione wasn't born out of affection. It was forged in confrontation. He saw what the wizarding world could be through her. Not pure blood, not rigid, not controlled by lineage or fear. She was the promise of something freer, and that terrified him. Respect, in his case, wore the mask of antagonism. That was all he knew. He was raised to crush dissent. But Hermione didn't bend. She never once acknowledged his insults as valid. That defiance earned something far greater than admiration. It earned his silent surrender. The irony, of course, is that Lucius Malfoy had spent years warning Draco about Granger types. Yet it was she who saved his son's life, not the Death Eaters. She who outwitted Bellatrix. She who stood beside Harry not just as a friend, but as an equal. Malfoy saw her stand against Voldemort's ideology, not with a wand, but with logic, law, and courage. She argued cases in the face of hexes. That kind of power was foreign to him. Even in moments of triumph, Hermione never gloated. After the Yule Ball, where she arrived with Victor Crumb, Malfoy's jibes about fraternizing with foreigners fell flat. Her beauty, her poise, were undeniable. For the first time, she wasn't just the clever girl in robes too big for her frame. She was radiant. Malfoy saw it, and he hated that he did, because if he admitted it, then all the lies he'd been told unraveled. When she helped Buckbeak escape execution, Malfoy was livid. But deep down, he recognized the act as something he could never do: challenge the ministry, risk expulsion, defy injustice for a cause with no reward. That kind of bravery made his petty taunts feel hollow. He repeated them louder. Granger's just a know-it-all. But no one laughed anymore. His mother, Narcissa, once asked him at dinner if the Granger girl still topped all her classes. He scoffed. Of course she does. But his tone lacked venom. It was closer to reluctant awe. Narcissa noticed. She didn't press further. But she saw the shift. Her son's scorn had dulled. In its place was quiet admiration and fear of what that meant. When the trio returned to Hogwarts for their 7th year, Hermione spearheaded the rebuilding of the school's library. Malfoy saw her organizing books in the Great Hall, charming floating shelves into place, fixing what war had broken. He lingered in the doorway. She didn't notice him, or maybe she did. But she kept working, sleeves rolled up, smudged with ash. He'd never seen anyone so focused. He left without saying a word. He would never write her a letter. He would never apologize. That wasn't in his nature. But when Scorpius asked him years later, is it true that Hermione Granger helped save the world? He didn't lie. He told his son, yes, more than once. And that simple truth, uttered with no bitterness, was the final proof. In the end, Draco Malfoy's feelings toward Hermione Granger were complicated not by love, but by the collapse of illusion. She represented the truth he was raised to ignore. She tore down his certainties with facts, with courage, with the sheer force of her intellect. She didn't just defeat Voldemort's ideology, she rendered it embarrassing. And Draco, cornered by that reality, chose the only path he knew, derision. But that derision masked respect, and respect, when denied, turns inward, bitter and unresolved. He never forgot that she had been right, about blood, about power, about fear. She had never needed to scream to be heard. She was the storm behind the silence, the one who changed everything without permission. And that, above all, was why he respected her. Number 20. His mother was his true anchor. In the heart of Malfoy Manor, surrounded by the cold marble floors and towering portraits of stern-faced ancestors, Draco Malfoy grew up beneath the gaze of legacy. Most believed that his path was laid by the footsteps of Lucius Malfoy, his father, proud and relentless, a man whose ideals were as sharp as the serpent on his cane. And for a time, they were right. Draco followed Lucius's lead, echoing his disdain for Muggleborns, adopting his posture, his prejudices, and his confidence. But as the war escalated and the cost of loyalty deepened, it was not Lucius's ideology that held Draco together. It was Narcissa. It was always Narcissa. Her presence in his life was quiet but profound, like a lighthouse in a fog of pride and fear. Unlike her husband, Narcissa did not crave attention or recognition. She did not parade her beliefs or seek favor from Voldemort's inner circle. Her love for her son, however, was uncompromising. And in the dark years of Voldemort's return, when Draco's world began to unravel, it was this maternal devotion that offered him a different model of strength. When Voldemort selected Draco to assassinate Albus Dumbledore, a task clearly beyond the boy's moral and magical capacity, it was not Lucius who intervened. Stripped of power and disgraced in the Dark Lord's eyes, Lucius stood by in fragile obedience. Narcissa, however, defied the very man who had taken over her home. She turned to Severus Snape, trusted enough by the Dark Lord to be his secret keeper, and asked him to make the unbreakable vow. "Will you, Severus, watch over my son Draco as he attempts to fulfill the Dark Lord's wishes?" Her words, spoken in the shadows of Spinner's End, are an act of quiet rebellion. She does not ask for power or revenge. She asks for protection. She chooses her child over ideology. Draco was unaware of the depth of this moment, yet its implications echoed through the following year. At Hogwarts, he was crumbling under the weight of his assignment, trying to repair the vanishing cabinet, failing repeatedly. His father's legacy had become a burden. His mother's love, even unspoken, was the lifeline. We see him becoming more withdrawn, paler, and increasingly tormented. He looked as though he had aged several years, the text notes in Half-Blood Prince. It was not cowardice, but inner conflict. It was the memory of the woman who had risked everything to keep him alive. In the tense moment atop the astronomy tower, Draco finally faces Dumbledore. Wand raised, hand shaking, he hesitates. He does not kill. And it is not Lucius's doctrine that pulls him back from the edge. It is a quiet voice in his memory, the echo of Narcissa's eyes as she begged Snape to protect him. It is the invisible hand of the mother who taught him, through action rather than ideology, that life mattered more than legacy. Narcissa's influence culminates in one of the most pivotal moments of the entire series. In the Deathly Hallows, the Battle of Hogwarts ends with Harry seemingly dead in Voldemort's arms. The Dark Lord commands Narcissa to confirm the boy's death. She approaches. But instead of merely checking for a heartbeat, she whispers, "Is Draco alive?" This question, simple and desperate, reveals everything. She no longer cares about the war, the cause, or even the consequences of defying Voldemort. She only wants to know if her son is safe, and when Harry quietly says yes, Narcissa lies. "He is dead," she tells Voldemort, sealing her betrayal and ensuring Harry's survival, because his survival is the only way the battle can continue, and thus the only chance her son has to escape the war alive. That moment was not calculated heroism. It was maternal instinct, a reflection of a bond deeper than ideology, a mother who recognized that protecting her son required her to place truth beneath love. This was the second time Narcissa had risked everything, first with the unbreakable vow, now with deception, Both acts form the emotional spine of Draco's development, although neither is known to the wizarding world at large. Draco would never say these things aloud. He is not the kind of man to express vulnerability, and certainly not to admit that his worldview changed because of his mother, but his actions tell the story. In the epilogue, we do not see a reformed revolutionary, but we see a man standing silently with his wife and son. There is no sneer, no sign of inherited hatred. When he locks eyes with Harry across the platform, there is no malice, there is a nod, a quiet, restrained gesture that says, "I remember." Narcissa never sought glory. She never received headlines for her bravery, nor did she want them. But her role was transformative, not just for her son, but for the war itself. She saved Harry Potter. She allowed the final victory to happen, and in doing so, she became the one person whose decisions defied every faction, every ideology, every fear. She acted for love. That love became Draco's guiding principle, even if he didn't understand it until much later. We often assume that children grow in the shadow of their fathers, especially boys. In pure-blood wizarding society, lineage and name carry enormous weight, and Lucius embodied that weight to perfection. But what saved Draco in the end was not legacy. It was mercy, compassion, maternal defiance. And these things came solely from Narcissa. The books give us few direct scenes between Draco and his mother, but they are heavy with meaning. In Deathly Hallows, after Draco is forced to identify Harry at Malfoy Manor, we sense the horror on his face, not just at the violence, but at the position he is in. Narcissa is there too. When Bellatrix tortures Hermione, Narcissa does not participate. She watches, silently. Her silence in that house of pain and fear speaks of internal conflict. She is not proud of what her home has become, and Draco, watching her, begins to understand that strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet refusal to join in the cruelty. The war ended with Voldemort's fall, but Draco's internal war continued. Narcissa's influence endured not through lectures or discipline, but through the moral compass she offered at key turning points. She was his true anchor. Even as the world burned around them, she taught him how to choose life, how to choose love, even when it meant deception. This is why Draco never became a Death Eater in the true sense. He bore the dark mark, yes, but he was never loyal to the ideology. His failure to kill Dumbledore was not weakness, it was strength of a different kind. The kind learned from a mother who stood alone in a house ruled by darkness and still protected what mattered. After the war, Draco withdrew from the public eye. He raised his son, Scorpius, not with Lucius's disdain for others, but with caution and detachment. We do not know much of his parenting style, but in The Cursed Child we see a man who, while awkward, clearly loves his son. He fears losing him. He encourages his happiness. That's not Lucius's influence. That is Narcissa's legacy passed down. It's ironic that the Malfoy name, once synonymous with elitism and cruelty, is redeemed quietly, not by public acts of heroism, but by private acts of maternal love. Narcissa changed the trajectory of her family not with spells or power, but with fierce, secret decisions that put her son before all else. And Draco, having lived through it, internalized it more deeply than he would ever say aloud. The world remembers the duel at the Ministry, the death of Dumbledore, the Battle of Hogwarts. But behind each of these moments is a quieter story, a mother refusing to let her son become a pawn. Her protection was not perfect, and it didn't erase the pain Draco endured, but it gave him a different kind of strength, the strength to walk away from a crumbling ideology. In the final pages of Deathly Hallows, Draco is not punished. He is not redeemed publicly either. He is simply present, changed, quieter, older. That silence speaks volumes. He survived not because of the purity of his blood or the strength of his wand, but because his mother taught him what survival really meant. she showed him that love required action, sacrifice, and sometimes lies told in the name of hope. Narcissa Malfoy remains one of the most complex characters in the series. She was never part of the Order, never stood at Harry's side, never denounced her family in public, but she saved Harry Potter, she saved her son, and in doing so she saved the part of Draco that could still be human, still be free. In the world of magic and war, she taught him the greatest spell of all, loyalty not to ideology, but to love. Number 21, he was a victim of the system. Draco Malfoy was born with silver in his veins and centuries of prejudice in his name. From his first breath at Malfoy Manor, the boy was not treated as a child, but as a future heir to a doctrine. Expectations were not suggested, they were imposed. He never got to choose what he believed. His lineage, pure blood and proud, was his burden before it was ever his pride. Lucius Malfoy, a man whose influence extended far beyond the drawing rooms of aristocracy, ensured his son would reflect the values of a world that had long since decayed from within. Narcissa, ever loving in her cold, composed way, did not resist the shaping of Draco's mind. She preserved him in the shell society expected. A boy like Draco did not have a chance to ask why. He was taught what to think, not how to think. At Hogwarts, Draco became what he was moulded to be. He mocked Hermione Granger for her blood status, not because he had a personal vendetta against her, but because the ideology had already rooted deep within him. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are better than others, Potter," he said the first time they met. This was not the voice of a boy discovering the world. It was the voice of a boy echoing his father's drawing-room lectures. The disdain in his tone was rehearsed. He didn't invent his arrogance, he inherited it. Behind every insult he threw at Ron Weasley, behind every sneer in the direction of Harry Potter, was a child trying to live up to a name he didn't ask for. The Malfoy crest weighed on his back more than any textbook in the Slytherin common room. Crabbe and Goyle weren't friends, not really. They were guards, henchmen gifted to him as part of his pre-written role. His life, even at 11, resembled a performance more than a coming of age. The persona of a bully was armor. In his second year, when the heir of Slytherin's legend returned to Hogwarts, Draco's voice rose eagerly about blood purity. But in private, he was bitterly disappointed that he wasn't the heir. He wanted power, yes, but more than that, he wanted recognition. His bravado masked a boy who needed validation. His family's ideology told him that power equaled worth. So he sought it not for destruction, but for affirmation. He was trying to matter in a world where love was conditional and reputation meant survival. During the Triwizard Tournament in his fourth year, Draco's mockery of Harry intensified. But there's something subtle in these moments, his jealousy. Here was a boy, raised without luxury, who stood in the spotlight, admired not for his name, but for his choices. Draco, on the other hand, could not separate himself from his surname. He did not know who he was beyond it. The idea that someone could rise without legacy disturbed him. And so he clung tighter to the only thing he knew: tradition, power, and disdain. When Voldemort returned, the war outside mirrored the war inside Draco. His father's disgrace at the ministry became Draco's shame. Lucius lost Voldemort's favor, and for the first time Draco saw his family's fragility. They were not invincible. They were pawns. He was no longer just a student. He was suddenly a tool for a dark cause, given a mission not as an honor, but as punishment. He was 16, and he was asked to kill. In Half-Blood Prince, Draco is different. The pride is cracked. The arrogance is dimmed. We see him retreat, isolated in bathroom stalls, face pale and hands shaking. He becomes the youngest Death Eater, not by glory, but by coercion. His assignment, to kill Dumbledore, is not a triumph. It is a sentence. "You don't know what I'm capable of," he tells Harry. in the bathroom before their duel, but we do. We see it. He is capable of crying. He tries to fix the vanishing cabinet for months, a desperate puzzle, not just for his mission, but for his soul. He is buying time, dragging out the inevitable. The fact that he hesitates so long, that he fails again and again, speaks louder than any spell. When he finally confronts Dumbledore atop the astronomy tower, his wand trembles. "I have to do this. He'll kill me." The words are raw. There's no Slytherin swagger. There's only a terrified boy with too many shadows behind him. And Dumbledore, who sees what others do not, offers him a way out. He knows Draco isn't a killer. He knows Draco has been trapped in a story written by others. But before any choice can be made, Severus Snape intervenes. The final act is stolen from Draco's hands, and in that there is tragedy. He never got to choose who he became. His defining moment was usurped, and in that instant he stopped being a villain. He became a casualty. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Draco is a ghost among the chaos. He's not fighting, he is searching, looking for a way to survive. Not out of cowardice, but confusion. His world is ending, and he has no new one to step into. When Harry saves his life in the Room of Requirement, dragging him away from the flames conjured by his own allies, Draco doesn't speak. There is no thank you. But his silence is loaded. For the first time, he witnesses mercy from someone he was taught to hate. It's worth noting that after the war, Draco does not return to dark causes. He does not rebuild the old ideology. Instead, he disappears from the spotlight. He marries Astoria Greengrass, a woman whose views differed from her family. Together they raise Scorpius in a world where the purity doctrine is buried. When asked about this shift in the cursed child, Draco confesses that he wanted something different for his son. "Scorpius is the most important person in the world to me, and he might always be just Harry Potter's son's friend. But if I had to choose between that and what I grew up with, I'd choose this, every time." That line, "what I grew up with," carries the weight of years of indoctrination, violence, and fear. Draco doesn't name it, but he rejects it. He does what Lucius never did. He lets the past die. He doesn't try to relive the old glory or prove his superiority. He finds peace in obscurity. That is not weakness, that is redemption. Throughout the books, Draco is often an antagonist. But antagonism does not equal evil. He is never a true villain. He never enjoys destruction. He does not crave blood. Even his cruelty at school is performative, a role inherited, not invented. And when faced with the ultimate choice to kill or not to kill, he falters. His failure is his salvation. In a world that rewarded obedience, he hesitated. He is a victim of a system that praised power above empathy, heritage above humanity, a system that praised Voldemort not for who he was, but for what he represented, a return to order, to bloodlines, to fear. Draco was born into that ideology. He did not question it because no one told him he could. And when the war shattered that illusion, he was left staring into a mirror with no reflection to recognize. The House of Slytherin is not evil, but in Draco's case it became a prison. He was surrounded by cunning, ambition, and pride, but rarely compassion. The qualities that might have saved him, doubt, kindness, honesty, were stifled. He was rewarded for cruelty and punished for uncertainty. It is no wonder that when he finally escaped, he did so quietly. Even Lucius and Narcissa changed, but only because they had to. Narcissa's decision to lie to Voldemort about Harry's death was not born of rebellion. It was maternal. It was personal. Draco, however, had to live with the legacy. He had to unlearn everything. He had to rebuild from rubble. That is harder than picking a side. That is transformation. There is a line in Deathly Hallows, subtle but powerful. When Harry, Ron and Hermione are imprisoned in Malfoy Manor and Draco is asked to identify Harry, he hesitates. "I can't be sure," he says, but he is sure. He knows. He lies not to protect Harry, but to distance himself. He doesn't want to be part of it anymore. That lie is a line in the sand. We often talk about heroes and villains, but Draco exists in the grey, and that is what makes him human. He is not to be admired, perhaps, but he is to be understood. He reminds us that environment shapes belief, that fear masquerades as loyalty, and that the cost of survival is sometimes silence. Draco Malfoy is not absolved, but he is explained he is not innocent, but he is not monstrous. He is a product of a poisoned inheritance, and he chose not to pass it on. In a world of wands and war, that is a kind of victory. Number 22, he wanted to be someone else. Draco Malfoy had the perfect life, on paper. He was born into a family of power and influence, the heir of an ancient wizarding bloodline, rich beyond imagination, and raised to believe in the superiority of that legacy. But behind the polished walls of Malfoy Manor, Draco was not just the proud boy we met on the Hogwarts Express. He was also a boy shaped by fear, a quiet conflict, and an unspoken wish to be someone else. While he sneered and mocked, something deeper stirred within him, a longing for freedom from the life already written for him. From the very start, Draco's choices were curated by others. His father, Lucius Malfoy, cast a long, cold shadow, one Draco was meant to mimic, without question. His mother, Narcissa, loved him deeply, but shielded him within that same gilded cage of expectation. When Draco entered Hogwarts, he was already armed with disdain for Muggle-borns, trust in blood purity, and a name that demanded respect or fear. And yet, even among his Slytherin peers, something in Draco seemed at odds with the role he was given. He postured too hard, insulted too loudly, as if trying to convince himself he believed every word. The envy he held toward Harry Potter was obvious, but not simple. It wasn't just about fame, it wasn't even about power, it was about something more painful. Harry was free in ways Draco could never be. Free to have friends like Hermione Granger, a Muggle-born witch celebrated for her intellect. Free to make his own choices even when they were hard. Free to stand up to adults, even to Dumbledore, and still be respected. And Harry's strength came not from lineage or gold, but from who he was inside. That burned Draco more deeply than he ever let show. By the time the Second Wizarding War darkened the skies, Draco was no longer a boy posturing in school corridors. He was a young man recruited by Voldemort himself, tasked with an impossible mission: kill Albus Dumbledore. On the surface, it seemed like an honor, a chance for Draco to prove himself worthy in the eyes of his father and the Dark Lord. But what it truly was punishment. Voldemort knew it was a death sentence, and Draco, for all his bluster, knew it too. The once cocky teenager was now a ghost of himself, pale, nervous, withdrawn. He stopped seeking attention. He barely spoke. Even Crabbe and Goyle were reduced to shadows beside him. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the subtle transformation of Draco is unmistakable. He spends long hours alone, sometimes weeping in the bathroom. "He's not himself," Hermione says to Harry. They see it too, the pressure, the fear, the weight of the task. And yet, he persists. He works tirelessly on the vanishing cabinet. He doesn't run, he doesn't betray his task, but more importantly, he doesn't complete it. In the climactic scene on the Astronomy Tower, Draco disarms Dumbledore. He has the chance. No one would stop him, but he doesn't strike. He lowers his wand. His hand trembles. Dumbledore speaks gently, not pleading, but understanding. And it's that compassion, something Draco has never received from his own masters, that almost breaks him. The words Dumbledore speaks matter. "Draco, you are not a killer." That moment is more than a reprieve, it's a revelation. Even Voldemort doesn't control Draco's heart. Despite everything, his upbringing, the threats to his family, the indoctrination, Draco still has a choice. And in that most critical moment, he chooses not to become a murderer. That one act separates him from so many others who were lost in the war. This act of non-violence is not the only time Draco deviates from the script. Later, at Malfoy Manor, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione are captured and brought before Bellatrix Lestrange, Draco is again tested. Bellatrix demands confirmation of Harry's identity. Draco stands there, hesitating. His answer is quiet, uncertain. He doesn't confirm it's Harry. He doesn't lie loudly. He doesn't betray. His silence, shaking, hesitant, is louder than defiance. "I'm not sure," he mumbles. In that moment, surrounded by Death Eaters with his parents watching, Draco once again chooses ambiguity over cruelty. What's remarkable is that these are not moments of glory. No spotlight shines on Draco when he makes these choices. He gets no recognition, no one praises him, no one even knows. And that makes it more powerful. His resistance is quiet, internal, and deeply personal. He doesn't become a hero, but he doesn't become a villain either. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the Battle of Hogwarts unfolds without Draco taking a heroic stance. He doesn't fight for Voldemort. He doesn't duel alongside Harry either. He is found with Crabbe and Goyle, trying to retrieve the lost diadem of Ravenclaw. It's not redemption, it's confusion. But when Crabbe releases Fiendfire and the room becomes an inferno, Draco is again put to the test. He could flee, but he turns back. He tries to save Goyle. And even Harry, his lifelong rival, chooses to save Draco. Twice, and this choice by Harry becomes another mirror Draco has to look into, because mercy given to an enemy is a kind of message. You can still change. When the war ends, Draco is not punished. He is not rewarded. He simply disappears. He and his family are spared from Azkaban because they turned away, if only partially, from Voldemort. But the scars are visible. When we see him again years later, on Platform 934, he is no longer a boy. He is a father, and he is alone, standing beside his wife and son, not with friends, not in celebration, but in peace. He nods to Harry. That simple gesture is heavy with meaning. He's not trying to change the past. He's not asking for forgiveness, but he is showing who he became, not a Death Eater, not a follower, just a man. There's no grand scene of Draco renouncing his father's teachings, no dramatic declaration that he's changed, and that's why it feels real. Because change, real change, is rarely loud. It's slow, it's complicated, it's made up of dozens of small decisions, of trembling hands and uncertain silences, of the moments you choose not to do something terrible, even if everyone expects you to. Draco's evolution is not about becoming good, it's about becoming himself. Astoria Greengrass, the woman he marries, is said to have shared more tolerant views about blood status. And though their marriage isn't deeply explored in the books, we know that together they raise a son, Scorpius, with a gentler heart. Astoria shields Scorpius from the prejudice that once defined the Malfoy name, and Draco supports her. That act alone speaks volumes. He chooses a different future for his child. The cycle is broken. In The Cursed Child, a controversial extension of the original series, Draco is portrayed as a grieving widower and a loving father. He admits that he envied Harry, not his fame, but his friendships, his connections, his freedom. "I used to envy you," Draco says. "Those friendships you had, I never had that." And he protects Scorpius fiercely, not as a Malfoy, but as a father. His love is not conditioned by power or bloodline. It's pure, the kind of love Draco never fully received from his own father. The boy who once insulted Hermione for her heritage now defends his son against those same accusations. The boy who used to mock Ron for being poor now finds no joy in cruelty. The boy who craved power now craves peace. That is the essence of Draco's hidden truth. He always wanted to be different, but didn't know how. And when the time came, he found the strength to try. Even the symbolism of his wand is telling. In Deathly Hallows, Harry disarms Draco at Malfoy Manor. That wand becomes the Elder Wand's master. It's not Voldemort, not Snape, it's Draco, a boy who never wanted to be a killer, ends up becoming, even for a short time, the master of the most powerful wand in history, without ever knowing it. There's poetry in that, power passed to the one who refused to use it. Draco's quiet revolution is easy to miss because it's not wrapped in applause, but it's there, in his trembling hands, in his silences, in the choices he doesn't make. He is the story of someone who grew up in darkness but refused to stay there. Of someone who was born into cruelty but didn't become cruel. Of someone who envied freedom and eventually found it. The books don't tell us exactly what becomes of Draco. They don't need to. That final scene on Platform 934 is enough. He's calm, he's distant from the war, he's no longer a boy who wants to impress his father. He's no longer someone who sneers for approval. He's just a man, a father, a survivor, and maybe that was all he ever wanted to be. Because in the end, Draco didn't need to defeat Voldemort to win. He only needed to defeat the version of himself that was shaped by fear. And he did, not with spells, not with fame, but with the quiet, aching desire to be free. Number 23, he didn't enjoy cruelty. Draco Malfoy never smiled when Bellatrix Lestrange raised her wand to torture Hermione Granger. He didn't lean closer, he didn't mock, he didn't even look. There was a moment, frozen in the dark, damp drawing room of Malfoy Manor, when everyone watched the girl's scream tear through the air. Everyone but Draco. He stood to the side, his body rigid, his eyes low, his mouth set in a hard line that betrayed neither interest nor triumph. The boy who once spat mudblood in the school corridors now seemed afraid to witness the consequences of the very ideology he had once parroted. It is a dangerous myth that cruelty always looks like rage, like bloodlust. Sometimes cruelty wears a school uniform and sounds like laughter echoing down the hallway. Draco Malfoy at 11 had learned the words that cut deepest, not from personal discovery, but from inherited belief. He used them without pause because that was what sons of his name were expected to do. But using a word is not the same as enjoying the pain it causes. When Hermione Granger's eyes filled with tears in their second year after he called her a slur in front of the Slytherins and the Gryffindors, he looked triumphant. But triumph is not always glee. Sometimes it is fear disguised as victory. By 6th year, the cracks in his armor had begun to show. In Half-Blood Prince, Draco was given a task by Voldemort, repair the vanishing cabinet, and find a way to let Death Eaters into Hogwarts. He accepted, perhaps feeling he had no choice, but the boy who once mocked Neville Longbottom in potions class began to unravel. His face grew thinner, his eyes more hollow. Draco Malfoy looked paler than usual, and his eyes were sunken, with dark shadows under them. The text reads, "He was not a young man consumed by ambition. He was a child trying to survive a mission he did not ask for." In the room of requirement, when Harry cornered him and cast Sectum Sempra, Draco bled. Not just physically, he bled in the metaphorical sense, as if years of pressure, performance, and posturing had been torn open. The scene is not written to show Draco as a victim, but it gives us a glimpse into the reality he never voiced. He was a schoolboy turned into a pawn. His body on the bathroom floor was the price he paid for pretending to be someone he was not. At Malfoy Manor, as the war pressed against the windows of his family home, Draco's discomfort became impossible to hide. When Fenrir Greyback dragged in Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the Death Eaters needed someone to confirm the identity of the prisoners. Narcissa asked her son, "Is it him, Draco? Is it Harry Potter?" He didn't answer. He didn't meet Harry's eyes. I can't be sure," Draco stammered. It wasn't cowardice. It was resistance of the only kind he could still afford, silence. It was the moment Draco chose not to condemn someone to death. Draco never raised his wand during the torture of Luna Lovegood or Ollivander. He didn't protest either, but absence of protest does not equal complicity of the soul. He remained still, fading into the background of his own home as others took pleasure in violence. The young boy who had once taunted Dobby with tales of his father's power now stood paralyzed, a quiet observer of horrors far greater than he had ever imagined. That, in itself, is telling. Had cruelty been in his blood, he would have leaned in, sneered, encouraged. Instead, he withdrew. Even in the Battle of Hogwarts, Draco's actions speak of confusion, not conviction. He enters the castle not as a fighter, but as a son, called to retrieve Harry for Voldemort. Yet in the midst of flames and collapsing walls, he hesitates. In the room of requirement, engulfed by cursed fire, he begs Harry for help, not with words, but with a terrified expression that no longer resembles the smug prince of Slytherin House. And Harry, who had every reason to leave him, pulls him to safety. The fact that Harry saved Draco more than once is no accident. It's a reflection of something deeper, that Draco was never fully their enemy. Even J.K. Rowling once stated in an interview that Draco was not a natural Death Eater. She explained, Draco was always torn. He was raised in this very dark ideology, but it never sat quite right with him. The books support this. Draco was raised on stories of blood purity and loyalty to Voldemort, but when the moment came to choose between ideology and humanity, he could not fully commit. In Deathly Hallows, the scene where Voldemort returns to Malfoy Manor after killing Charity Burbage is particularly chilling. Burbage pleads with Snape, then turns to the Malfoys, crying out for help. Nobody moves. Lucius looks away. Narcissa is stone-faced, but Draco, he seems the most human. The book notes, Draco's face was stricken. Stricken, not indifferent, not entertained. It is a word reserved for those who feel something, shame, horror, regret. His silence in those moments was not cowardice, but a desperate attempt to protect the last shreds of his identity. He had been bred for elitism, schooled in cruelty, but confronted with real evil. Draco recoiled. When children are taught hatred, they may echo it. But when they witness its consequences, when the screams become real and the blood pools at their feet, the echo dies. Draco watched as his world cracked and his parents clung to power in vain. He saw what allegiance cost and he flinched. In many ways, Draco's character arc is not about redemption. He is not Severus Snape, whose double life paints him as a tragic hero. He is not Harry, the chosen one with a scar and a purpose. Draco is the boy who survived something different, the slow corrosion of certainty. He was taught to believe in strength through dominance, but he learned painfully that dominance often looks like madness. By the end of the series, he is still quiet, still hesitant, but he has stopped pretending. Cruelty did not make him happy. His laughter at Hermione in their earlier years was not the laughter of someone amused by pain, but the nervous mimicry of a boy performing what he thought would win approval. Approval from his peers, his housemates, and, most of all, from his father. Lucius Malfoy cast a long shadow, and Draco, for many years, lived under it, reaching upward with trembling hands for a legacy that terrified him more than he admitted. In the epilogue, 19 years later, Draco stands on platform 9 3/4, watching his son board the Hogwarts Express. He nods at Harry, not a smile, not a handshake, but a quiet, respectful acknowledgement. That moment matters. It is a recognition of shared history, of pain endured, and of the silent understanding between two men who were once boys on opposite ends of a war. Draco, who once bragged about his father's power, now stands alone, his son's hand in his own. That moment is not a grand gesture of repentance, but it is honest. Draco's arc is not about public apology or heroic transformation. It's about internal change, the hardest kind. He had seen the worst of what his world could offer, and he chose not to pass it down. Scorpius Malfoy, his son, grows up without the poison of blood ideology. He is shy, kind, awkward, everything Draco was never allowed to be, and that is perhaps Draco's greatest victory. What makes Draco's story so compelling is that it remains incomplete. We never see him confront Hermione or apologize. We never see him explain himself to Harry. But we don't need to. The evidence is in his silences, in his hesitations, in the way his wand trembled when asked to identify his enemies. Evil, when it truly arrives, is not something he can look at. In a world that often divides characters into heroes and villains, Draco exists in the in-between. He is a reminder that the line between cruelty and fear is thin, and that the loudest voices are often trying to drown out their own doubts. His story is one of quiet defiance, not against Voldemort, but against the lie that power must come at the cost of empathy. When readers label Draco a sadist, they forget the boy who couldn't bring himself to kill. They forget that he lowered his wand in the astronomy tower, even after Dumbledore stood unarmed. They forget that he was pushed aside by others more willing, more eager. Draco's refusal was not loud, but it was there. Malfoy Manor was a house full of ghosts, living ones. Narcissa's love, Lucius's broken pride, Bellatrix's mania, and Draco's silence. In that haunted place, no screams were louder than the unspoken ones, and Draco, pale and drawn, flinched more from them than he ever had from a spell. His story is tragic, not because he became a villain, but because he almost did, and because that almost cost him his innocence, his peace, and his sense of self. He did not relish cruelty, he simply lacked the power to stop it. But sometimes that unwillingness to join in is the first step toward becoming something better. Number 24. He explored dark magic, but not for evil. Draco Malfoy stood at the edge of a world he didn't fully understand. His father had whispered about the power of dark magic since he was a child, speaking of it with the same reverence others reserved for ancient family heirlooms. The name Voldemort was forbidden in the open, but not in hushed conversations behind closed doors in the drawing room of Malfoy Manor. Draco learned early that dark magic was not only feared, it was respected. Not for its violence, but for its potential. Power, mystery, and control, that was the aura it radiated. While others saw a boy sneering behind robes and pure-blood arrogance, what they missed was the deep restlessness under his skin. He wasn't drawn to darkness to harm. He was drawn to it because it made him feel something other than weak. The Malfoy household was a castle built on tradition and silence. Narcissa loved her son with a quiet fierceness, but Lucius ruled the home with polished menace. Expectations weighed heavily on Draco's shoulders, and from a young age he understood that his life was not truly his own. When he arrived at Hogwarts and was sorted into Slytherin, it was not a surprise, it was a confirmation. He wore his badge like armor. And yet, as the years went on, he felt more and more like an actor in someone else's script. Dark magic wasn't just rebellion, it was a refuge. In the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, Draco's fingers often lingered over titles like Secrets of the Darkest Art and Magic Most Evil. He would never admit how long he'd stare at the faded letters, how often he'd return to the same spines. He wasn't seeking instructions for murder, he was searching for meaning. The spells he found weren't beautiful, but they were effective. They could silence, they could shield, they could force a change in the world around him. Draco didn't feel evil learning them, he felt safe. In a world that demanded too much and gave no mercy, dark magic was his answer to helplessness. When the Carrows arrived at Hogwarts in his 6th year, and when Death Eaters roamed the halls like professors, Draco's hands trembled behind his back. He was no longer playing with shadows. The war had entered the walls. He had been tasked with an impossible mission: kill Dumbledore, and yet he couldn't do it. Standing on the astronomy tower, wand-pointed, body shaking, he hesitated, not because he was afraid of Dumbledore, but because he was terrified of what completing the task would make of him. It was not cowardice, it was conscience. "Draco, Draco, you are not a killer," said Dumbledore softly. And for once, Draco didn't sneer, because it was true. What many failed to see was that Draco's fascination with the dark arts had begun long before he was told to become an assassin. During his 5th year, while the Ministry denied Voldemort's return and Umbridge ruled the school like a pink tyrant, Draco was already exploring forbidden spells in secret. He practiced non-verbal magic, read about curses that could disarm without maiming, and even memorized the mechanics of occlumency, not to deceive others but to protect his own mind. He didn't brag about these things, he didn't have to. The real purpose was inward. There was one spell that particularly captivated Draco during his years at Hogwarts, Sectum Sempra. He had discovered it in an old copy of Advanced Potion Making left in the Room of Requirement by someone long gone. Scribbled in the margins by the mysterious Half-Blood Prince, the spell promised to wound violently to make one's enemy bleed. Draco never used it in casual dueling. He studied it with a mixture of fear and reverence, not because he wanted to injure someone, but because it reminded him how easily destruction could be wielded by those who understood the right words. That level of control was intoxicating and terrifying. In his 6th year, Harry used Sectum Sempra on Draco in the bathroom, slicing him open without realizing the full consequence. Blood soaked the floor, and Draco lay gasping, more shocked than wounded. In that moment, his obsession with power turned on itself. This was what dark magic could do, not just protect, not just intimidate. It could maim, it could kill. And for the first time, Draco understood that knowledge itself wasn't enough. Intent mattered, motivation mattered. He had studied darkness for control, for security, but in the wrong hands it became chaos. It nearly became his death. There was a moment after that duel when Madame Pomfrey had left him to rest. Alone, stitched up with spell and salve, Draco stared at the cracked ceiling and felt something unfamiliar, shame. Not at losing the duel, not even at being hurt, but at realizing that he had misunderstood the very thing he had clung to. Dark magic hadn't made him stronger. It had only masked his fear. He had not become a man through mastery. He had only become more scared. He was never close to Crabbe and Goyle emotionally. They were muscle, not mirrors. But Blaise Zabini once asked Draco why he spent so much time reading dusty books in the common room after curfew. Draco told him it was none of his business, but the truth was simpler. Those books gave him a sense of identity. When you grow up being told you're special but feel worthless inside, you search for anything that confirms your worth. For Draco, that came in the form of knowledge others avoided. Knowledge is power, Lucius had once said, and Draco believed him, but he misunderstood. Knowledge without compassion is empty. Draco's relationship with dark magic mirrored his own emotional spiral. He didn't want to hurt others. He wanted others not to hurt him. He wanted to be someone his father respected, someone Voldemort feared, someone his peers admired, and dark magic, mysterious, forbidden, thrilling, seemed like a shortcut to that status. It was never about cruelty, it was about identity. Even in the final battle at Hogwarts, Draco hesitated more than he acted. He didn't curse anyone, he didn't stand beside Voldemort. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione were captured and brought to Malfoy Manor, Draco didn't confirm Harry's identity, even though he easily could have. That small refusal was not cowardice, it was defiance, subtle, almost invisible, but powerful. He had already begun pulling away from the ideology that once defined him, and with it, from the magic that once held him spellbound. The Malfoys were not known for mercy, but in the Battle of Hogwarts, when Narcissa lied to Voldemort and declared Harry dead, it was for her son, not the Dark Lord, that she betrayed the cause. This moment showed how love, not magic, ultimately dictated the Malfoys' choices. And Draco watched silently as his mother chose family over fear. That was a kind of magic too, more ancient and potent than any spell he'd ever read. In the years after the war, Draco did not become an aura, or a politician, or a radical. He became a father. He raised Scorpius with less weight on his shoulders, more softness in his voice. And though he never fully spoke of the books he once read, the spells he once studied, he taught his son something he had never been taught: that strength lies not in what you can destroy, but in what you can protect. This, more than anything, was his redemption. In The Cursed Child, we see a Draco who is quieter, more thoughtful, more aware of his past mistakes. He doesn't brag, he doesn't condescend, he mourns, he worries, and, in a poignant moment, he admits to Harry, "My son is the most important thing to me now. And while I do worry about how he's treated at school, I also worry about what he'll think of me." This vulnerability is not the mark of a villain. It is the mark of someone who has wrestled with darkness and survived. Dark magic was never the destination for Draco. It was a vehicle, a mirror, a symbol of a boy who felt invisible behind the name Malfoy. It's easy to label people. It's easy to say he was a coward, a bully, or a villain. But Draco was a product of fear and pressure, raised in a culture that glorified purity and scorned weakness. When he explored the dark arts, he wasn't falling into evil. He was reaching for control in a world where children were handed wands and forced to choose sides before they understood the war. The books do not linger on Draco's quiet moments. They show us his arrogance, his fear, his cruelty. But if you look closely, you'll see something more. You'll see the boy who lowered his wand, the boy who looked away, the boy who didn't take the final step. And in that pause, fragile, trembling, human, you'll find the real reason he studied dark magic. Not to wield it, but to understand what it meant to have power, and to learn over time that there are other kinds, better kinds. Draco Malfoy was not evil. He was lonely, misguided, hungry for identity. And the allure of dark magic is especially powerful to those who feel powerless. To reduce him to a villain is to miss the tragedy and the truth of his character. He was not seeking to cause pain. He was trying to stop his own. And in that, he becomes not just complex, but achingly real. Number 25. He was too mature for his age. Draco Malfoy was 16 when he was told to murder Albus Dumbledore. There was no illusion of choice. Refuse, and his family would die. Fail, and they would be tortured. This wasn't a childish dare or a schoolyard threat. It was a direct order from Lord Voldemort himself. The same Voldemort who had returned from death, who had killed without blinking, who had no tolerance for weakness. The order was not designed for success. It was designed to break him. For years, Draco had played the role of the privileged pure-blood prince. He taunted, sneered, walked the halls of Hogwarts with the arrogant confidence of someone untouchable. But that illusion cracked the moment the war crept into his own home. Lucius Malfoy had failed at the Department of Mysteries, and Voldemort had made an example of him, not by killing him, but by making his son carry the burden of redemption. 16 is too young for war. 16 is too young to be told your family's fate depends on your ability to commit murder. We see Draco change slowly in Half-Blood Prince. His swagger fades. His pointed insults lose their venom. He isolates himself. He becomes thinner, paler. Moaning Myrtle, of all people, becomes his confidant because she's the only one who doesn't expect anything from him. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he tells Myrtle, but it's a lie, and he knows it. He's been tasked with building a vanishing cabinet connection between Borgin and Berks and Hogwarts. He spends weeks on it, perfecting it, obsessing over it. He is no longer concerned with school, Quidditch, or house rivalries. He is a child building a weapon that might save his parents' lives, or doom them. Snape watches him carefully. He sees the toll. He offers to help. He even makes an unbreakable vow with Narcissa Malfoy, promising to protect Draco and, if necessary, to complete the task in his place. But Draco never wanted help. Pride, fear, desperation, they all mingle into a tightly wound coil inside his chest. He wants to succeed, but he also doesn't want to kill. He wants to protect his parents, but he also wants out of this nightmare. These are not dilemmas meant for boys. These are the burdens of soldiers, of spies. But Draco is still just a schoolboy, lost between Slytherin corridors and ancient, cursed cabinets. There is a moment on the astronomy tower when everything collides. Dumbledore is unarmed, calm. He doesn't raise his wand. "Draco," he says gently, "you are not a killer." And he's right. Draco's hand shakes. His voice breaks. "He'll kill me. He'll kill my whole family." The layers peel away. No arrogance, no sneer, just fear. Raw, trembling fear. He's holding a wand, but he doesn't want to use it. He's been told that failure means death, but he can't bring himself to kill. The boy who once bragged of joining the Death Eaters is paralyzed at the moment it matters most. It's easy to forget that Draco is just 16 because the stakes around him are so adult. Voldemort doesn't care about his age. He expects loyalty, silence, and results. Draco's failure would not be forgiven. Even his success would only lead to further horrors. The assignment was never about proving himself. It was about surviving. And when Snape steps in and casts the fatal spell, Avada Kedavra, Draco doesn't look triumphant. He looks shattered. He watches as Dumbledore falls, not as a victor, but as a boy who nearly became something he couldn't live with. At the start of the school year, Draco arrives with a bruised ego and renewed determination. He's been humiliated by his father's arrest. He's seen Voldemort's anger firsthand. He wants to restore the Malfoy name, but ambition gives way to terror. The Vanishing Cabinet project is meticulous. Each day is a risk. He can't ask for help. He can't talk to his friends. Even Crabbe and Goyle become mere bodyguards in disguise. They pose as girls to watch the Room of Requirement while Draco works late into the night. The pressure is inescapable. This is psychological warfare. Every moment at Hogwarts is laced with dread. He jumps when someone calls his name. He flinches when a professor asks him a question. His dreams are nightmares. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't eat. He looks ill, doesn't he? Hermione notes, and she's right. The boy who once strutted through corridors is fading. He's unraveling. His world has shifted. House points and Quidditch matches are meaningless now. He's living with a death sentence, delayed but inevitable. The Malfoys, once the pinnacle of pureblood status, are now pariahs. Lucius is a fallen man. Narcissa is a mother clawing for her son's life. Voldemort doesn't reward failure. He toys with them, uses their home, insults them, holds them hostage with kindness, laced in threats. Draco is a pawn, not trusted, not respected, just used. He's still in school, but his education now involves dark spells, hidden passages, and assassination plots. He's being groomed for cruelty, but he can't wear it convincingly. Dumbledore sees all of this. That's why he doesn't fight back. He knows that killing Draco would be Voldemort's real victory. Instead, he talks to him, offers him a way out, offers to protect the Malfoys, offers hope. "I do not think you will kill me, Draco. It is not as easy as all that." And Draco almost believes him, but he can't risk it. He's in too deep. There are too many eyes, too many expectations. And so he hesitates. And Snape steps in, and the game is over. After that night, Draco is no longer a player in the war. He's a survivor. When the trio is captured and brought to Malfoy Manor in Deathly Hallows, he barely recognizes them. He doesn't confirm Harry's identity. He stalls. He's not brave enough to help them directly, but he's not cruel enough to betray them. His silence saves lives. It's a small act of defiance, but a meaningful one. The boy who once mocked Harry's scar now refuses to identify him. That silence is all he has left. By the time the Battle of Hogwarts erupts, Draco is no longer pretending to be anything. He's not fighting for Voldemort. He's not defending Hogwarts. He's lost. We see him running from the Room of Requirement, trying to retrieve something for Voldemort, trying to stay alive. Harry saves him twice. Not because they're friends, but because Harry sees what Draco could have been and what he still might become. There is no glory for Draco, only survival. In the epilogue, 19 years later, Draco stands on platform 9 3/4 with his wife and son. He nods at Harry not in friendship but in silent understanding. Both of them have grown into men shaped by war. Both have chosen different paths, but they are no longer enemies. Draco's face is older, more tired, but softer. There is no sneer, just distance and a kind of peace. Perhaps he never found redemption, but he found a way to live. Draco's story is one of stolen youth. He was thrust into the dark too soon, expected to be a man before he had finished being a boy. The wizarding world is full of heroes and villains, but Draco belongs to neither. He was a child molded by fear, by family legacy, by a war that didn't ask his opinion. His choices were often wrong, but they were made under duress. We can't excuse them, but we can understand them. And understanding is the first step toward compassion. We remember Harry's suffering because it's at the center of the story. But Draco was suffering too, quietly, alone. His pain wasn't loud or noble. It was hidden, sharp-edged, humiliating. He was too proud to cry, too scared to act, too young to process any of it. But that's what makes his arc so tragic. He didn't get to be a child. He didn't get to grow up on his own terms. He was told to become something he wasn't and nearly lost himself in the process. J.K. Rowling never asks us to forgive Draco, but she does ask us to see him. The boy on the astronomy tower with a wand in his hand and fear in his eyes. The student obsessed with repairing a cabinet because it was the only way to save his mother. The son who watched his father crumble and realized no one was coming to rescue them. These are not the markers of a villain. They are the scars of a boy who was cornered by the world and told to become a monster or die. In that sense, Draco mirrors the trio more than we realize. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are praised for growing up fast, for stepping into war and surviving it. But Draco also grew up too fast. He bore his trauma in silence. He didn't have the support of a loyal group of friends, a wise headmaster, or even a cause to believe in. He had only fear and obligation, and he almost broke under the weight of both. "He's scared," says Harry, when Ron scoffs at Draco's behavior. "He's a coward." But Harry corrects himself later. Cowards don't go to the astronomy tower. Cowards don't try to protect their families. Cowards don't stall before pulling the trigger. Draco wasn't a coward. He was a child, being asked to do the unthinkable. In the end, it is perhaps Draco's refusal to kill that defines him more than any of his previous actions. He didn't become a Death Eater in truth. He never cast an unforgivable curse in battle. He didn't die for his cause because he didn't have one. He simply lived. And that, for someone like Draco Malfoy, was its own act of rebellion. The war left scars on everyone, some visible, some not. Draco's scars are hidden beneath fine robes and quiet nods on train platforms. But they're there, etched into the lines on his face, in the way he holds his son's hand, in the silence that speaks louder than any boast. He didn't save the world, but he survived it, and maybe that was enough.